Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for our Aliyah planning session for professionals and young families. My name is Sarah Chertoff. I'm an Aliyah advisor at Nefesh B'Nefesh, and I'm going to be talking with you this afternoon about getting your mind wrapped around all the things you have to do as you're planning your Aliyah. Now, this session is really geared toward people who are just starting to figure out where they want to go and what they want to do, and they want to understand more about the process. If you are already working with an Aliyah advisor and far along in your planning, this might not be the webinar for you. We have tons of other relevant and very interesting sessions on our YouTube channel, but this is really for those who are just starting to get themselves figured out about what they want to do and need the information how to get themselves started with their Aliyah. So we're going to jump in. Today, we're going to be talking about two different categories of Aliyah preparation. One of them is the process. There is the physical, the dry documents that you have to submit in order to get approval for your Aliyah to come to Israel. We're going to run through what that looks like, how to start, what the process looks like, some of the terms that you'll be coming across as you're going through this process. And no less important than the process side of things is your planning side. Figuring out where you're going to live, how you're going to support yourself, understanding the education and the healthcare systems. The more you've planned and the more you're prepared for what life will be like when you get here, the easier everything is going to be as you start your new life in Israel. Let's start talking about very, very basics. What is Aliyah? We throw this term around all the time, Olim, Aliyah. What are we referring to? Well, at the very basic level, we're referring to taking on Aliyah, Israeli citizenship. Somebody who does not have Israeli citizenship is eligible under the law of return, and they decide they want to live in Israel, they want citizenship, they apply and are granted citizenship. In addition to the very baseline of Israeli citizenship, Olim who make Aliyah are also entitled to a series of Aliyah benefits. These are benefits granted by the state of Israel in recognition of the fact that taking a big step to uproot your life wherever you're coming from and move to Israel, and the benefits are meant to help ease your way. Now, there are certain people who may be already Israeli citizens, we'll talk about that in a minute, who are eligible for Aliyah benefits. So for those people, when they're applying to make Aliyah, they might already be citizens, but what they're applying for is their benefits, their recognition that they're entitled to these benefits. When we talk about Aliyah eligibility, there are a whole bunch of different statuses that fall under these categories, and what your status is, what your background is, will determine what your process looks like. It's important to understand which one of these statuses you are relevant for you, so that you'll understand what process you're going to have to go through. I'm going to go through these on a very, very basic level. When you're ready to dive deeper, please be in touch with us, with our Aliyah engagement team, and they can talk to you a little bit more about the specifics. And once you're really ready to move forward, your Aliyah advisor will guide you for all the specific things that you need for your Aliyah. Ben Oleh Hadash is the term for somebody who has no Israeli background whatsoever, has no Israeli parents, never held a long-term resident visa, somebody who's sort of starting from scratch with the Israeli government. An Ezrach Oleh is somebody who was born outside of Israel to at least one Israeli parent. This is somebody who is officially eligible for Israeli citizenship, but is also able to apply for benefits. A Katin Choser is somebody who was born in Israel to Israeli parents, but left as a child with their parents and decides to come back to Israel as an adult. The Katin Choser is also already an Israeli citizen, but eligible to apply for Aliyah benefits. Somebody who is a former temporary resident who held what's called an A1 visa. They were never a citizen, but they did have a status. Their benefits may be affected, but they also are applying for Aliyah as they were never Israeli. And Mishpachat Olim is a status that refers to somebody who is an Oleh Hadash or eligible for benefits under the status of Mizrach Oleh or Katin Choser, who's married to somebody who is a Toshav Choser. That's the next one we'll talk about in a second. And they have minor children who were born outside of Israel making Aliyah with them. This status, this family designation, grants broader benefits to the Toshav Chozer spouse who would normally not get the same benefits package. And they're treated as a family because one of the parents is eligible for Ole benefits. The Toshav Chozer is somebody who had Israeli citizenship, was living in Israel, and left as an adult, fits certain other criteria, and then is now moving back to Israel. Those criteria are having been out of Israel for long enough, 5 years, not working for an Israeli entity like the Jewish Agency or one of the consulates, and they are also given a status from Misrad HaKlita, which is the Ministry of Aliyah and Integration. They're not considered Olim. There's a separate process for the Toshavim Chozrim unless they are part of a Mishpachat Olim. I mentioned Misrad HaKlita, the Ministry of Aliyah and Integration. Let's talk about them and all of the other, I'm going to move myself over here, and all of the other partners that we work with who help bringing you home. Nefesh B'Nefesh is one. I represent Nefesh B'Nefesh. We are a nonprofit private organization whose job is to help facilitate Aliyah. We help connect the dots between all of the other Aliyah partners and help provide you with the guidance and information to help bring you home. We work hand in hand with the Jewish Agency, our very close partners. They are the government representatives responsible for determining Aliyah eligibility. We'll talk about it soon, but you'll have to submit documents and go through an interview process that is with the Jewish Agency, as they are tasked with, again, determining Aliyah eligibility and granting the final Aliyah approval. On the Israeli side, the Ministry of Aliyah and Integration, Misrad HaKlita, they're the ones who are providing the Aliyah benefits once you get here. Some people get confused and say, oh, Nefesh B'Nefesh gave me. Nefesh B'Nefesh provides a lot of services, but the benefits that you'll receive when you get here are from the government directly through the ministry, and you will have much more interaction with them once you arrive in Israel. And for those of you who do have some Israeli background and need things like Israeli passports from the consulate, we'll be interacting with the Israeli consulates abroad. Those are our main partners. There are some other partners that we work with, like municipal coordinators at the city level. Some cities and towns have full-time staff members that will help Olim get settled as they're making their transition to Israel. And those are all city and town specific. The timeline, how does it work? Okay, so you're planning on making Aliyah and you want to know how long it's going to take so you can figure out when you need to start doing each thing. Unfortunately, everybody's situation is a little bit unique. I can't guarantee exactly how long everything will take, but here's the framework so you understand how the timing works. The first step, once you're ready to move forward, is to submit your application on the Nefesh B'Nefesh website. The application is a questionnaire. We basically intake the information about your background and your family and where you're coming from and help determine what status you may be so that we can provide the information for you of what you need to submit in order to move forward. We also have an online interactive portal for you that's created with your application that lists all of the documents that will be necessary for your Aliyah approval. You can submit your documents directly through the portal, track your progress, and use it as your guide for what's left. Once you've submitted digital copies of all of your documents, don't worry, we'll speak in a minute about what those documents are. You'll need to have an interview with the Jewish Agency. Currently, due to COVID restrictions, documents are mailed into the Jewish Agency office for review. The originals have to be seen by a person at the Jewish Agency, and then your interview itself will be done via Zoom. Please God, one day we will be back to more face-to-face interactions, and documents will most likely be brought directly to your interview like they were before COVID. Once you've had the Jewish Agency interview, your application is sent to the eligibility board, which sits in Jerusalem. They review your documents and they review your application, and then either let you know that there's other documentation that might be lacking or outstanding or something else they want to see, and then they will inform you of your Aliyah approval. If you are an Oleh Hadash or someone who doesn't have previous Israeli background, your Aliyah approval will come with instructions for getting an Aliyah visa. Those who already have an Aliyah visa, an Israeli passport, do not need a visa. Anybody else does. That's done directly through the consulate via the Jewish Agency. Your Mazal Tov email will include those instructions, so make sure you keep your eyes out for them. And once you have your visa and your approval, you'll be invited by our flights department to book your Aliyah flight. Typically, when to start your application, we recommend doing it 8 to 10 months before you're ready to come. Many of the documents need to be less than a year old. So applying too early sometimes puts you in a situation where you may have to redo some of the documents you've already submitted. Filling out the application comes with absolutely no commitment. You are simply filling out the questionnaire to get the information that we need to guide you towards Aliyah until you arrive in Israel with a valid Aliyah visa in your passport, or come to Israel with your Israeli passport and declare your intention to have made Aliyah. You haven't actually done anything that's binding, or there's basically there's no commitment until you make that final step. You haven't committed yourself to anything. The application is going to ask things like, where were you born? Were your parents? Like I said, all of these questions help us determine for you what your process will look like. Were you born in the former Soviet Union or in a Middle Eastern country? Did you have a temporary residence visa? Did somebody in the family make Aliyah in the past? If you do need Israeli passports for members of your family who are eligible for them but might not have it, we do recommend working on that process in parallel, maybe even earlier, because your ability to make Aliyah will be dependent on having that passport in hand, and working with the consulates can take a few months on its own. So definitely don't put that off if you fall under a status category that requires an Israeli passport. Basic documentation for interview. I am not going to go into the small details of every single document. Sometimes document requirements will change, like I said, depending on your background and your history with the Israeli government. But these are the basics. Everybody is going to need, more or less, these documents. A valid passport. That's number one. Anybody making Aliyah, including babies, needs to have a valid passport of the country of origin. Some sort of proof of Judaism, which is a letter from a rabbi on synagogue letterhead that is dated and pen signed. Or if you converted, there's a list of documents that are required to prove the conversion. All civil documents need an apostille. Civil documents are things like your birth certificate and your marriage status certificates. If you've been married, it's a marriage certificate. If you've been divorced or unfortunately widowed, you'll need to provide a death certificate with the apostille. Jewish agency forms, there are a list of forms that you'll find on your portal that the Jewish agency requires. You'll fill those out, sign them, and send them back. Everybody over the age of 14 needs to submit a criminal background check with apostille for any country that they've lived in for at least a year above the age of 14. For Canadians, it's impossible to get a background check under the age of 18, so not to worry. And we'll talk about what an apostille is in a second. And there may be additional documents. If you have a name change, then you'll need to provide legal name change documents with an apostille. If you are coming separate from your spouse, there are other documents that need to be signed, most often with an apostille. So it's important to take a look at those things and make sure that you leave yourself enough time to collect all the documents. What is an apostille? It's this term I keep throwing out. An apostille, I'm gonna read from the slide because it's a really great definition. It's an international certification that allows official documents to be certified for legal purposes in another country that is also party in the Hague Convention. It's important to note that not every country is part of the Hague Convention. Israel and the United States are, and apostilles are issued by the state that issued the document. So let's say you were born in California and your husband was born in New York, and you have one child born in Wisconsin and another child born in Texas. You will need 4 different apostilles from 4 different states, and that's assuming you were married in one of the states that you already need an apostille from. If you were married in a 5th state, the apostille on your marriage certificate will need to come from that state. Every state has their own rules, their own fees, their own processes, and your Aliyah advisor can help guide you with the instructions from each state. You can also find it on Google. The Secretary of State's page for each state has instructions if you search for apostille. Canada is not part of the Hague Convention and therefore part of the Apostille Treaty. Canadian documents need to be certified directly at the Israeli consulates in Canada. There's a separate process called the chain of signatures, and then the documents are certified by the consulate for use in Israel. Different Canadian documents will have different requirements for the consulate to be able to certify. You should be in touch with the consulate directly to get those instructions. Those who need background checks from Canada will need their background check certified by Global Affairs in Ottawa before they can get the Israeli consular stamp, just as an example. Some can be certified directly and others need a middle step certification. The consulate is very happy to help answer those kind of questions and guide you in Canada about how to get the certifications that you'll need. There are special paperwork cases for those that don't fall necessarily under the categories that I've mentioned. Olim born in the former Soviet Union. There are very specific definitions of why somebody would have to go under what's called the Lishkat HaKesher process. Not going to get into right now, your advisor will work with you on that. But somebody who falls under the category of needing Lishkat HaKesher has to submit a whole different list of documentations in a different way with a different process. An unregistered Ezrach Oleh is somebody who was born to Israeli parents outside of Israel, but they were never registered at the consulate. They need to get their Israeli passport, and the list of documentation to do that will differ depending on how old the Ezrach Oleh is and what exactly their parent status is. If both parents are Israeli, just the father or the mother, there's a whole long list of requirements for this. We recommend, if you know you are somebody who falls under the category of Ezrach Oleh and you've never been registered, please make sure you register as soon as possible. That process can be done a year, 2, 3 before you actually apply for Aliyah. But once it's out of the way and you have the passport in hand, by the time you're ready to approach your Aliyah process, you'll already have that piece taken care of. Conversions, if you converted, there's a different list of requirements than just the rabbi's letter. If you've undergone an adoption or name change, or there are errors on documents, maybe your birth certificate had your name spelled with an I and then your passport has it spelled with a Y. You'll need to present some type of legal document connecting the two names. Often a name change from a court with an apostille is the easiest. Previous marriages, if you've been married multiple times, you'll need to submit all of the marital status documents for those marriages, multiple marriage certificates with apostille, all of the documents that attest to the end of that marriage, whether it be divorce or death, also need an apostille. Special needs documents. If you have a family member who has special needs, often Misrad HaKlita will require a separate questionnaire for the family to fill out in order to confirm that the special needs Oleh will have the care that they need when they arrive. If you have other healthcare concerns, the Jewish agency may ask for a letter from a doctor. And any other documentation that the Jewish agency feels is relevant in order to move forward with your Aliyah application, they can and will ask for. Sometimes you'll know about it before your Aliyah interview, and sometimes it will only be after that the Jewish agency decides that something else is required, and they will ask you to provide it. We've been talking all this time about how to get Aliyah eligibility and that you're eligible for benefits. What are these benefits? The main benefits you may have heard of. This is the list. We have a very in-depth article on our website that goes through and details what exactly the benefits are, what the time limits on the benefits are, what the conditions are for these benefits, because there are terms and conditions for some of them. The main ones are a free flight to Israel with 2 pieces of luggage, a taxi from your first destination, from the airport to your first destination, basic Israeli healthcare. This is offered for the first 6 months, unless you're working. Once you start working, your healthcare fees are directly deducted from your salary, and then this benefit basically disappears. Ulpan is intensive Hebrew instruction. You're eligible for classes paid for by the government. There are various tax breaks that are offered to Olim during different timeframes. There are customs benefit for importing things, including on a new car. Lower mortgage rate for buying a property. Sal Klita is cash that's received during the first 6 months to help you as you settle in. The amount that you receive is dependent upon your family status, how many children you have, and will vary depending on your personal situation. There are rent subsidies as well as higher education subsidies for those who fall within the relevant age range and other conditions. All of these benefits are provided by the state of Israel via Misrad HaKlita. Customs are managed through different offices, but everything comes out of the office of Misrad HaKlita. We've talked about the process. We've talked about all the things you're going to have to get together in order to apply for Aliyah and be approved. But I really think it's important to take a moment when you could get overwhelmed by all the documents and all the checklists and things you have to do. And I want to make sure you don't forget to think about the planning piece. At the end of the day, this is your life. This is a move where you are deciding to live somewhere else. And it's important that you have that checklist filled out as well. And make sure that you know what you're coming towards and that you're prepared, so that you can have as smooth of a transition to Israel as possible. We're going to be talking about community, education, healthcare, and finances. Community, the number one question is, where are you going to live? Israel is an incredibly diverse place, different communities all over the place that might be right for you. And the most important thing to do at this stage when you're starting to wrap your head around the idea of Aliyah is to ask yourself, what are you really looking for? Are you looking to be in Israel, but you really want to be in a very Anglo community? Are you looking to move to Israel and specifically be in a place where there are very few Anglos to force yourself to integrate and learn Hebrew? Are you looking to live in a city? Are you looking to live in a town? Are you looking to live in a place where you can live without a car and everything is accessible by walking or public transportation? Are there certain pastoral things that are important to you? You want to be near the beach? You want to be in the desert? Do you have a situation where you need to be within a certain distance of a hospital? These are all questions that you need to start asking yourself at the long-term planning stage to help you narrow down what kind of communities may be right for you. Just a little plug for one of our other videos. We recently did a new session about finding your community in Israel. If you're in the long-term stage, that is a great session to tune into, where we really go through the details of asking yourself those questions of, what are the different communities? What are the options out there? How do I determine what's best for me? We have resources that are available for you, community and school contacts. Some of them can be found on our website, like those municipal coordinators that I mentioned. The best way to learn about a community is to speak to people who live there. Once you use the internet and the Facebook groups and the resources on our website to sort of narrow down a short list, I highly recommend searching out people who live in those communities and asking them, what is life like? What is the commute like? What is, how far away is the nearest grocery store? What is the community vibe, religious wise or not? What schools are available? These are really, really important questions, and the best people to answer are the people who live there. Something to think about is availability and affordability. You might be really interested in a community, but it's out of your budget. Or you might be really interested in a community, but housing is very scarce in that community, and it could take a while till you find a place. There's certain places that are very difficult to find a place before you make Aliyah. Smaller communities, especially properties that are opening up, tend to first trickle through the community by word of mouth before they're published anywhere. So if you're not living in a place you want to live, maybe in a rental, and you want to buy something, you won't even know that things are becoming available until you're here. Also, short-term versus long decision. Depending on what your family makeup is, it might make more sense to figure out which community is the right place for you to land on your Aliyah. A larger city that will have more resources, that will have a municipal coordinator and maybe more Ulpan hour options, more Anglos in the community to help you feel more at home. But really, your long-term goal is something different. And you might say, okay, for the first couple of years, we're going to do step one and then get ourselves more acclimated and do the Ulpan and figure ourselves out a little more, feel more settled, and then start figuring out which maybe smaller community or community closer in the periphery is better for you. Those of you who are coming with children, I don't recommend this as much. Remember, this move is going to be a big move for everybody in the family, and will be especially acute for children. It's really important to make sure that you are paying attention to everybody's needs within the family and finding a community that will be the best fit. I'm sure there's no perfect fit for everybody, especially in large families, but the best fit for the family, because you're only as happy as your most unhappy child, and we want to make sure that everybody finds their place in the community. Speaking of children education, in order to understand the education system, again, we have great, longer, deeper sessions about this subject. It's important to note that most education in Israel for age 3 through high school is what you would consider in North America public school education. By law, every child in Israel is provided a place in a school that fits their religious background. So if you are religious, your child will be placed in a religious school. Same thing if you're non-religious, that's your choice. And the government must find a place for your child in the school. Finding the right schools for your children. Depending on where you're planning to live, you might have fewer options or more options. If you plan to go to Jerusalem, the sky is the limit. You know, there's lots and lots of children and schools for every type of background and religious flavor. there is a school there. Some of them are semi-private or regional. Some of the schools are town schools that go by your address. They're zoned just like you would find in North America. You live in this part of town, your kids are going to go to this school. You live in that part of town, they're going to go to the other school. It's important to really research what the school options are and understand what might be best for you. Certain cities and towns have schools that have a higher population of OLED children, and therefore the school has a little bit more resources. By law, all OLED children are entitled to extra help in school to help them learn Hebrew and catch up. But how those resources are used are school dependent. And the schools that have larger Anglo populations tend to have more robust programs in place. I'll give you an example. In Haifa, there are a whole bunch of religious elementary schools, but there are only 2 that have programs that are geared toward English-speaking OLED children. So if you were to speak to the municipal coordinator in Haifa, they would suggest, and the city would pull, no matter where you're living, would pull you to one of those schools to make sure that your child has the best of the resources that the city can offer. Registration for schools is typically done in January, February. Most municipalities will not allow you to register until you have a Tudat Zehut and even sometimes an address. If you are a family of a Mishpachat Olim and all of your kids already have Israeli passports, they already have Tudat Zehut numbers, you may be able to be in touch with the city, with the municipal coordinator in advance to save spots for your kids. If you're making Aliyah in the summer with OLED children who don't yet have that number, you may have to wait until you arrive. Being in touch with the municipal coordinator is very helpful in this case, because even if you can't be officially registered, if they know you're coming, they make sure to take your child into account as they build the class sizes, and there will be room for your child in the best class. Benefits for OLED children, like I mentioned, are done in the school. There's no ulpan like the adults get, which is separate Hebrew classes, but there are in-school child-focused benefits to help them settle in. Healthcare. Healthcare in Israel is very, very different to healthcare in the United States. It's a little bit more similar to the Canadian model. There is a national healthcare law, and every Israeli citizen is covered under the national healthcare system. The healthcare system is administered by 4 different health funds. These are called Kupot Cholim. There are 4 different ones: Meuchedet, Klalit, Maccabi, and Leumit. When you make Aliyah, before you get on the airplane, you'll need to decide which one of the health funds you are going to join. Don't worry if you get here and you're unhappy, there is a process for switching. But in order to be covered as soon as you arrive, you need to know which one you want. How do you decide which one you want? It's important to know that by law, each one of them offers the same services. They're simply the administrators of what's called the health basket. Those where every couple of years, the health ministry and the government determine what services, what medications, what treatments are covered under the national healthcare system. And these are all administered by the Kupot Cholim. The main difference is going to be access to those services. And this is where it's important to be in touch with people who live in the areas where you plan to live and can tell you which ones are good. If you're living in a large city, it's really not going to make a big difference. All 4 of them will be represented in the cities. The main difference might be Maccabi in Modi'in might have a lot of English-speaking doctors, but Meuchedet in Jerusalem might have a better English-speaking doctor system. So while you could join any one, it could be that in the city or the town you're planning to live, there's one that's stronger or that's more OLED friendly, and this you'll get some feedback from speaking to people. If you take medication, we highly recommend that you research your medications and make sure that they're covered under the health basket. It could be that you take a certain brand medication and the generic is available here or a different type, or maybe your medication isn't available or it's only available privately, and that's something you'll need to build into your budget. The Shira Pransky Project is a nonprofit organization that has a great website and Facebook group that provides a lot of the information about the health funds to help navigate the healthcare system. Your advisor can also give you contacts within the different Kupot Cholim if you have specific questions about treatments that you need, and you want to understand exactly what and how, what kind of equivalence is available in Israel. We have contacts that can help answer these specific questions. The system here is different in the sense that you need to be your own advocate with your healthcare needs. Your general practitioner, your family doctor is sort of the your main doctor who will give you referrals to specialists and will manage any other extra care you need. But it's really important to understand that the culture here is that you will need to stand up for yourself and ask for what it is that you need and really self-advocate. That being said, I have found that the healthcare system here is incredible. All of the Kupot Cholim offer supplemental levels of health insurance. This is additional coverage beyond the basic. There's a monthly fee for it. It includes things like surgeries in private hospitals, second opinions with private doctors who are out of network, additional medications and treatments, either ones that aren't covered at all or covered at a much higher rate by the Kupot Cholim. It's really important to know that as an Oleh Hadash, if you join these extra levels of coverage within 90 days of your Aliyah, all of the waiting periods are waived. So if an Israeli who wasn't part of one of these extra plans joins, they have to pay into the system for 6 months, a year, depending on what the extra benefit they want to use is before they're eligible to use it. Olim, if they sign up within the first 90 days, are eligible to use everything right away as if they've been paying all along. So if this is something you're considering, please note that it's worth doing as soon as possible and not delaying so that you don't lose out on this benefit. Unlike the basic level of healthcare, which you will walk out of the airport with your receipt of your coverage, this is referring to Olim only. There are other statuses that this is not the case, so make sure to discuss it with your Aliyah advisor if you are of an Aliyah status, anything other than an Oleh Hadash. Everyone is signed up relatively quickly, but it's important to know it's not automatic. The supplemental levels I mentioned are all it's all done after you've arrived and after you've done some of your initial setup. You'll go into a physical office of the Kupot Cholim and finalize your sign up and let them know you want those supplemental levels. Finances. It's really, really important as you're working towards this move and building yourselves up for it that you understand cost of living and what your budget will be. In a second, I'll show you a sample budget to give you an idea. We have others on our websites for different family constellations because at the end of the day, you have to pay your bills and put food on the table. Employment opportunities, understanding what your employment prospects are in Israel is really important. We have a lot of employment resources on our website. We have an employment team that can help you. We have a job board that you're welcome to search and get an idea for what the market looks like here, what your skills could translate to here. It might also determine what community is the right community for you. If you are looking to work in a field that's location specific, or you don't want to commute and you know that most of that type of job are concentrated in certain places. So looking into what your employment opportunities are very important. If you are planning on bringing your job from North America, it's really, really important that you speak to an accountant, somebody who understands the complexities of cross-border taxes and the tax treaties. Where you physically are doing the work is an important piece of this, and how you set yourself up so you're doing everything legally is important. Nefesh B'Nefesh Aliyah advisors are not tax and financial planning professionals, but we highly recommend that you speak to one, especially if you're planning on keeping some of your money in North America, if you have pensions, investments. It's all very important part of your Aliyah research. In Israel, unlike, at least speak for the United States, where you have to actively file a tax return, in Israel, all of your income tax and your healthcare fees and your Bituach Leumi, which is the National Insurance Institute, closest thing to Social Security, are all withdrawn at source from your paycheck monthly. And if you don't have any investments, or you don't have any other properties or money abroad, there's no separate filing that needs to be done. But for many of you, that might not be the case. You will have, like I said, pensions or investments, work done abroad. And so you will need an accountant to file a tax return in Israel. Lifestyle changes. It's important to take into account how your life might change when you move to Israel. Maybe you were living in a place, I grew up in Houston, Texas, and everybody had a car. There was very little walking done. Things were not accessible easily by public transportation where I lived, and everybody had a car. In Israel, that's not the case. Most families have at most 2 cars, and in some cases that's a lot. but also a lot of people live in apartments versus homes. Some people like to shop in the shuk. They like to go to the market and buy their produce and their nuts and spices by bulk, by weight, as opposed to grocery store shopping. There's no Amazon Prime here. So these are all things to sort of start researching and wrap your head around how your lifestyle might change and how that's going to affect your budget. School here, it's like I said, it's all public school. So if you're paying private school tuition in the US, that will drastically lower your education costs. If you are members of a gym in the States, it's important to figure out, do you want to still be a member of a gym in Israel? And how much does gym membership cost where you're looking to live? Taking all of these data points, all these pieces of information and putting them together to draw your family picture is really, really important. Also remember, you will be getting some financial benefits that we discussed earlier. It's important to take those into account as well, understanding what kind of cushion you'll have when you first arrive, while you're looking for work, as you get yourself settled. These all need to be taken into account into the broader picture. And here is one of our sample budgets, just so you can see, we really break it down to categories: rent, or maybe you're buying a place and you have a mortgage, food, communications, your utilities, municipal taxes. Now, some of these things will vary wildly depending on where you live. Entertainment, children's education, certain things if you're planning on aftercare or what we call after activity school game, depending on where you live, maybe your municipality will subsidize the cost of those things, and one municipality will be cheaper than another. Childcare, depending on your kids' ages, that will vary wildly. So all of these things. Entertainment, maybe you're not the kind of person who goes to plays and concerts and movies, then you're more of a homebody. So your entertainment budget will be much smaller. But really sit with the numbers, play with them. We've collected data from lots and lots of OLEF families to put these together to help you understand what you can be expecting. So this is a budget for a family of 6. On our website, like I mentioned before, we have one put together from multiple constellations of family sizes, but I highly recommend you spend some time with this and start figuring out what you'll need and how you're gonna make sure you have it to ensure a successful Aliyah. There's a lot of information out there, a lot of resources. There are a lot of Facebook groups. It's an incredible resource if you're planning on making Aliyah. I know not everybody's so into Facebook, but the Aliyah-centric groups are really, really helpful. One of my favorites is Living Financially Smarter in Israel. We just talked about budget and finances, and it's a wonderful place to just read the existing posts, see what questions other people are asking, ask your own questions. There are a lot of people who answer on that group, people who are living here and can tell you from their personal experience what to expect. Network, specifically about work, specifically about community, specifically about school. Anybody that you know who can give you some more insights into any aspect of your Aliyah is somebody that you should be reaching out to. You have a neighbor who has a cousin who's living in the community you're considering, speak to the cousin. Don't be shy, especially if you're looking for work. Israel is definitely a tight-knit community, and people tend to find jobs by knowing somebody who introduces us to somebody who lets them know about an opportunity. Again, don't be shy. There are tools on the internet like Glassdoor, which give you information about companies, and Chilan, tax calculator, and others that'll help you understand if you're being quoted a certain salary, how much you can actually expect to receive in the bank at the end of the month after all of those taxes that I mentioned are deducted at source. Also, knowing your rights when you're looking for a job. Employment rights are a little bit different than they might be where you're coming from in North America. Again, we have articles on our website, but it's important to look into those things and make sure that you're coming in with your eyes wide open. I know I've just spoken for over 40 minutes, tons and tons of information. We've recorded the session and we will send it out to you. It'll be on our YouTube channel so that you can come back to it and get an idea of what it is that you're supposed to do as you're getting ready for your Aliyah. I hope you all the best in the Hatzlacha. The more planning and the more research and the more you look into things, like I said, the easier it'll be when you get here. And we are here for you every step of the way. Please don't hesitate to be in touch. My email address can be seen here on the slide. Again, my name is Sarah Chertoff, and looking forward to welcoming you home. Take care.